Hello everybody, welcome along. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's awesome to have you here. It looks so far like tonight is going much better than it did last week when everything started off by going up in flames. So apologies to everyone who missed the start of the show or missed the whole show last time because of those technical problems. But congratulations to those of you who did end up finding us. So tonight, hopefully things will go a little bit better. Oh, by the way, we did do the show last week. For those of you who aren't sure, it is archived on our YouTube channel. So feel free to go back and look that one up and you can watch the whole last show. So anyway, on with tonight. So first of all, let me just turn my lights on like I was supposed to do at the start and we'll get on with things. So let's have, I tell you what, we might just put that off because there's something going on over there. So what we might do is we might actually start by thanking our sponsor, On Fire. Thank you so much, guys. Our sponsors are back again from last week. On Fire, local specialist fire engineering consultants. We love these guys. They've got a really good reputation for their work in fire engineering solutions, and they're also really good supporters of the community. So thank you so much, David and Debbie and the whole team from On Fire. We really appreciate your efforts out there. So here we are in tonight's live studio audience, all coming in at the last minute. So welcome along everyone. Again, we have a small but very enthusiastic live audience. So nice to have you guys with us here tonight. Our floor manager again tonight is Floyd, helping us out with all sorts of technical and other issues. And over there in the background we have Jess, who is looking after our social media, and she will be taking any questions and comments and things in the live chat. So Jess is keeping an eye on the live chat for us tonight. Now we have one other thing that we may try tonight. We talked last week about phoning in. So we didn't try it last week because of all the other hassles that we were having. But if you want to phone in, the phone number is just right down there. What will happen is that you'll just ring our phone, Floyd will answer it, and then you can come through and hopefully, if everything goes well, you can come through and have a chat on the show. So we'd love to try that. In the future, we will definitely be looking at getting video call-ins happening as well. But one thing at a time, we will learn to walk before we can run. So shall we have a look at the program for tonight, shall we? So it's pretty much the same kind of lineup that we had last week, the same format. It seemed to work pretty well, so we'll carry on with that. We don't need to go through every single thing there, but look, there's lots of news to talk about tonight, so I imagine that we're going to spend a little bit longer than normal on the news segment, and we will get to that very shortly. First up though, of course, it is competition time. We love the competitions. Now before we get into tonight's competition, let's just tidy up from last week. The interesting pie competition. I really enjoyed this one. So the pie was won by Renee and her family from Hamilton. Thank you so much, guys. I hope you enjoyed your pie, or if not, I hope you at least had a little bit of fun with the whole process there. So the object of last week's competition was to figure out what was interesting about the pie, and it turned out to have been an apple pie made with apples from this tree, which is at the back of our house. This apple tree is directly descended and genetically identical to this tree, which is Isaac Newton's family tree. Now we had a lot of questions after the show last week asking how on earth did we come across this tree that was descended from Isaac Newton's tree. The story behind that is that some time ago, about mid last century or earlier, actually it must have been earlier than that I think, someone brought a cutting from the Isaac Newton tree in England and brought it to New Zealand, and it was planted at the property of the old DSIR in the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, thank you, so in Lower Hutt. And this tree is taken from a cutting from that tree, so that's how we managed to come across that tree. So we only get one pie a year, by the way. Other people were asking if they could get some apples or a pie as well. Sorry, it's only a little tree there. We get one apple pie per year, and that went to Renee and her family. Anyway, this week's competition. We've got a question for you this week. Don't worry if you don't know what this means. All will become clear soon. The question is, should NASA keep SLS going or cancel it and just use private launch vehicles? If you already have an opinion on that, post away now. By the way, you can put it on the live chat. You can ring and tell us. You can email the answer. We'd better just keep it at that tonight, actually. But if you don't know what any of this is about, we're going to cover that very shortly in the news segment. Righto, so before we get, let's go straight into the news, shall we? First of all, have we got any news from the Space Centre here itself? Well, we do have one thing. I think it was yesterday, a gentleman by the name of Kevin Pryor came in and said, he came through the door and said, "G'day, I brought you some donations." And I thought, well, that's a good start. I always like it when someone opens with that. And he had a nice little bag of goodies, including this beautiful watch. Have a look at this. This is an amazing timepiece. I absolutely love this one to pieces. So it's an astronomical watch where you can use it to see what's in the sky. Basically, you've got the constellations and things there. So I love this watch. We're going to put it on display here. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Kevin and Esther. We really appreciate that donation there. I did seriously consider using this as my watch. However, the astronomical part of it really would not work for me. It would be no use to me whatsoever. Someone tell me why. There's no prize for this one, but if you can figure out why that watch is no use to me as an astronomical watch, post away. Does anyone, actually I suppose we could ask the live audience. Oh, you guys are already going to know, aren't you? Does anyone know what's wrong with that watch for me? Thank you very much. Everyone else, the question's already been answered. I knew that would happen. It is a Northern Hemisphere watch, so you can see it there. So, but it's a beautiful watch. Thank you again, Kevin and Esther. I really do appreciate that. Right, I think that's all the news from the Space Centre itself. We don't really want to go on about us, so let's get stuck into the actual news, what's happening out there in the world of space. So just bear with me a sec. I think what I will do is I'll get this video up and running, and hopefully we will have a look at this. So this is actually a recent launch of the Soyuz rocket. Now in there are 3 astronauts on their way to the space station. So that's the launch of the rocket. It launched from Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. This is currently the only way to get people to the International Space Station. And there we are at the space station there. That is the Soyuz spacecraft there coming in to dock with the space station. So similar to what we saw last week with the Crew Dragon coming into dock, but it docked at a different place. We're inside now, inside the space station. So this is the docking hatch inside the space station. Those are the 3 astronauts that are inside the station opening the hatch, and these are the new astronauts, the new 3 members of the crew coming up to the space station. They're very happy to be there. Now you may remember we mentioned that there have been only 3 astronauts on the space station lately, which is unusual. There are normally 6. The reason for that is that last October, the Soyuz spacecraft that you saw before, that rocket, well not that exact one, but the one that was carrying the crew last time, actually got all explodey on the way up, and things went drastically wrong. But fortunately, the launch abort system, which we've also been talking about, worked really well. The astronauts were able to get away from the spacecraft and land safely, and now they get another shot at getting up to the space station. So they just all took that in their stride. It's a failed rocket launch. Never mind. We just live with that and we move on. So now the space station is back up to its full complement. I've got a picture here of all 6 astronauts up on the space station. Well, astronauts and cosmonauts, I should say, shouldn't I, really? So it is an international space station, and at the moment we've got, 3 Americans, 2 Russians, and 1 Canadian up there. There's a Canadian guy on the left. You can see the 2 guys, the Russians in the middle there, and the Americans. So that's what's happening on the space station. We're back to a full complement, so that's good news. In other news this week, we'll just quickly go through a couple of things here. The Beresheet moon lander. This is a really interesting project, this one. So this is a robotic space probe, you could call it, a lander that is on its way to land on the moon. It was launched in February. It takes a long time to get there, which is quite normal for space probes going to the moon. They don't need to get there quickly like people do, so they can take their time and do it much more cheaply. So it's hoped that this will land in April. And it's only going to survive for a couple of days, we expect. So it's only a short mission. It's a bit of a proof of concept. But the big news here is that it is the first private lander on the moon. So this is the first thing outside of a government agency that's going to be put on the moon. Now, I've been talking recently about the new race back to the moon. This is part of it, this kind of stuff here. We're not just seeing NASA wanting to go back to the moon, we're seeing a whole bunch of other stuff going to the moon as well, and it's really starting to hot up there. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll definitely be coming back to report more on that, especially in April. Now, Mars Insight. This is the one that we watched when was it? A couple of weeks ago? Oh, no, sorry, it must have been back in November. Yikes, already. Yes, it was too. I can't think what we watched a couple of weeks ago. It was the Crew Dragon, that's what I'm thinking of. Anyway, so the Mars Insight landed on Mars back in November. This is a lander. It's not a rover, so it doesn't move around. It's just a robotic lander. And it's got a whole bunch of scientific instruments on board. One of them is its heat probe, which needs to dig down into the ground to find out a whole lot of stuff about the internal goings-on Mars. Unfortunately, as it started digging down, it ran into a problem. In fact, that's obviously a computer-generated image that you're looking at there, but here is a real photo from the lander of the thing where it's trying to, well, it hammers rather than drills, but it's going down into the ground. Unfortunately, it didn't get out very far at all, and it's got stuck. So when you look at the ground there on Mars, there aren't big rocks there. So the scientists felt that it was quite a safe place to land and drill into, and it should have been, but unfortunately there's a problem. It's stuck. So they've paused it for now, and they're trying to figure out what to do next. As far as I'm aware, there's no updates yet, and they're still trying to figure out what to do. I'm not too concerned that it's taking them a long time. There's no hurry to fix this, and it's better to take your time and figure out what you want to do rather than just rush into a fix. But it is still a little bit worrying that they've struck something unexpected so quickly. It's not the end of the mission. You know, there's plenty of other stuff going on with this mission, but it would be a real shame if that one doesn't work. Now, this is probably a good example of the old robotic spacecraft versus humans argument. If there was a human being here, they could probably sort this out in 10 minutes. But without a human being there, it could be much, much more serious. So we're just waiting and hoping that this will all turn out all right in the end. What else have we got? Rocket Lab. New Zealand's own Rocket Lab is hiring. Would you like a job at Rocket Lab? If you are a launch technician or a launch engineer, then you can apply for a job. It is in the States though. So I should point out that this is not in New Zealand at Auckland or Mahia. You will actually have to go to the new facility that they are building in the States. So there you go, jobs at Rocket Lab. Rocket Lab's doing really well, of course, at the moment. They've got a launch coming up any time now, so we're keeping an eye on that. The launch that they've got, it's actually a DARPA mission, which is a military mission, so we just kind of don't talk too much about that. We just sort of pretend that stuff's not happening. Anyway, good on you, Rocket Lab. You're doing a great job. Love your work. Now, the big news. We're going to have to spend a little bit of time on this next one. I don't really want to be spending a lot of time on any particular news story normally, but this one is worth spending a little bit of time on, and it is the President's budget, or at least the budget request. So what's happened is President Trump, as part of this whole process, he puts out a budget request to Congress, then they get to discuss it and argue about it endlessly, and then they come back with what they're actually going to fund in that budget. So it's important to note that this is just a request. It's not an actual budget, it's the start of a negotiation process. Excuse me one moment. So we're only talking about the NASA part of this. Okay, so this is a big budget, but we're only interested in the part of the budget that affects NASA. And it does affect NASA's program for quite a few years into the future. So we don't need to go through all the stuff that you're seeing there, but that's just kind of a little bit of a sort of a broad overview of what NASA has got planned coming up. Now, to discuss what's happened in the budget request and what's going on at NASA, we are going to have to go back a little bit and do just a quick revision of history to see how we got to where we are now so we can understand what's going to happen next. So just bear with me while we do this. I think this is a worthwhile exercise just to recap here. So we're going to go right back to the 1960s, to the start of NASA's human spaceflight program. There's a whole lot of stuff in that picture. I hope this makes sense. On the left there, so this is part of the Apollo mission, the rockets and the system that took people to the moon. On the left, you see the Saturn V, which is the biggest, most powerful rocket that so far has ever been built. Now, with apologies to those of you who already know this stuff inside out, let's just quickly look at how that works. When you've got a big rocket like this one, the important or the interesting part really is this part up the top there. That is the payload. That's the part that you want to get up into space. All the rest of it, this stuff down here, that is the launch vehicle. And the purpose of all of that stuff is simply to get the payload up into space. So all of that launch vehicle there is either just thrown away, or these days we are looking more at reusing it. So basically that's not part of the actual mission itself. It's just kind of like the vehicle that gets it into space. Actually, I'll tell you what I'll do. Let me just show you a quick picture. Well, not a picture. Let me show you an Earth. This is the Earth here. So you imagine, where's Florida? It's around there somewhere. So imagine that you are launching over here and you're going into space. So that big rocket that you've got there, you launch from here, most of that rocket is gone by the time you get to here. Okay, so it's a launch vehicle that just gets you off the Earth into space. And then your launch vehicle, you're finished with that. So from there, it's just your payload that you are concerned about. So in this case here, we've got the launch vehicle, and the payload is this lot over here. So in this case, with this kind of system, you've actually got two things in the payload. On the left, you've got the command and service module. Excuse my scribbling, it's terrible, I know. And on the right, you've got the lander. So what happens? You've got the launch vehicle takes those two things just into low Earth orbit or into Earth orbit, and those two things together go from Earth orbit all the way out to the moon and go into the moon's orbit. So we've got the launch vehicle, then we've got the transit vehicle that takes you all the way to the moon, then you've got the lander. So once you get to the moon, they split up. The command and service module, the CSM, that continues to orbit around the moon, and the lander is the bit that actually goes down onto the moon. And when that's finished, the top bit of the lander actually comes back up, meets back up with the service module again. They come all the way back to Earth, and that's how they get back down here. They use parachutes to land. So that, in a nutshell, is how the Apollo system worked to get people to the moon. And that's pretty much kind of the same sort of system that we're going to be looking at in the future. But in the 1970s, the Apollo program finished. That was the end of that. We don't build those rockets anymore. From then on, it was the space shuttle, of course, from 1981 through to 2011. That's an entirely different kind of vehicle. We're not going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about what happened next. So when it started coming time to think about retiring the shuttle fleet, the question was, what comes next? And well before it was actually retired, in President Bush's term actually, now it was 2004, he made a speech and he announced this new constellation program. So on this graphic that you see here, on the left you can see the Saturn V from the Apollo era and the space shuttle, and then the new proposed constellation vehicles. So you've got the Ares 1 and Ares 4, kind of similar to the Saturn V, the same sort of system. So you've got the launch vehicle here, you've got the transit vehicle over here, and you've got a lander here. So same kind of thing. President Bush said, right, we're going back to the moon, it's all happening, away you go NASA, go ahead with all of this. Sadly, he didn't actually give them any money to do it, he just gave them the instruction and thought that that would be enough. It wasn't. What happened then was NASA spent a lot of time obviously working on this program and developing it, but then when President Obama came in, he set up a commission called the Augustine Commission, and in 2009 the Augustine Commission looked at the progress of Constellation and found that it was so seriously underfunded that it had absolutely no chance of ever succeeding, no matter how long they stuck at it. So Obama said, what we're going to do is we're going to just cancel it. So in his budget request at the time, he just didn't request any funding for it, effectively cancelling it. However, things get more complicated, so bear with me. What happened was that when he sent the budget request to Congress and to Senate to see what they thought of it, they actually still wanted it to go ahead. Now, why would that be? It's because of the way all of these things are made. NASA is structured in such a way that it's spread out all around the states, and they've got NASA facilities everywhere, and they've got private contractors all over the place that are making parts for these rockets. So they didn't want this to stop. of course. They want to keep making rocket parts. You can actually see some of the rocket parts there. For example, these solid rocket boosters, these date back to the shuttle era. They're basically the same components just being reused again and again so that they can keep using the same stuff, keep the same facilities open, keep the same jobs going, and keep the same politicians happy. The politicians don't want to lose these big facilities, of course. So what happened was that the Senate has a lot of clout, obviously. The big businesses in their states have a lot of political clout, so they said we want to keep these going. So what happened was the Senate, although they couldn't give funding for this, they decided to give funding for a new system called the Space Launch System, or SLS. And so now we're starting to get to the meat of it now. Now, this is sometimes facetiously called the Senate Launch System because it's often said that it's only the Senate that really wants it to keep jobs and no one else really cares. I think that's a little bit harsh, but it is an interesting question. Do we actually need this extremely expensive rocket or not? I should have pointed out before, sorry about this, but when President Obama cancelled Constellation, what he was doing was saying, we don't need NASA to make these things. We can get private companies to do it because they're already doing it, and it looks like they can do it cheaper, more efficiently, much quicker. And so he wanted the move to go from these big projects here, these big government projects, through to private companies. And that's actually worked really well. So the question is, if the private companies are making these rockets, do we actually need the SLS? So the SLS has been justified by Senate and by NASA, perhaps because they've kind of got to toe the line. But the theory at the moment is, or the justification is, that the private companies can do the smaller launches, like what we saw last week, the Crew Dragon going to the International Space Station. The International Space Station is very close to the Earth. It's just orbiting just around here. So that's a low Earth orbit thing. So SpaceX can hopefully start sending people to the space station into low Earth orbit. But to get further away, the justification is we need these bigger spaceships. So Senate and NASA has been saying we have to have SLS to get things to the moon. There's another mission called the Europa Clipper mission to one of the moons of Jupiter, and some other things, perhaps going to Mars or asteroids or things like that. So that's what the Senate and NASA is saying. Yes, the private companies can do a whole lot, but we still need SLS. That's why we're still building it. Okay, now we've still got the Orion. That's still left over from the Constellation. That's still developed as well, but you'll notice that there's no lander in here. And so that was the thing with the Space Launch System, SLS. It didn't have a lander, but other than that, it's kind of just carried on. So that's where we have been up until recently. Now, last week, you may remember that the news came out just not long before we'd gone live, and I hadn't had much of a chance to look at it. But we heard from the President's budget request that he was happy to keep funding these two rockets here. This is all SLS. These are different versions of the SLS. The two on the left there are two versions of the same first version, I guess. Let me go back a bit. There are three versions that we are looking at here: Block 1, Block 1B, and Block 2. Each block has two different versions. One for cargo, one for people. So the ones that I've highlighted there, that's really just one system, but you can have it set up for crew there, or you can set it up for cargo over there. That looks like I've got to put a face on there. Shall I make a little smiley face out of that? Okay, let's carry on. Dave, you're getting sidetracked. Okay, so anyway, that's what President Trump had said. We'll carry on with those, but he defunded effectively all of this stuff, and that was the thing that we made a big issue of last week. So really, the whole point of building these two over here is that they are a pathway or a starter to build these ones over here. So the question is, if you're not going the whole way, why are you bothering with the first block? Okay, so yeah, that was the big news last week. What's going on? Where's this all going to go? What does it mean for SLS and NASA if they're not actually going the whole way? Because the first version, the Block 1, is actually not that much more powerful than what the private companies are doing. It's really the much more powerful ones over here that that's where the justification is, that we will end up with these much bigger ones. If we're not going to end up with them, why are we still worrying about those first two? Right, the next thing I want to do is I want to play you a video. Just bear with me a moment here while I get that get ready. We've got a video here from, let me just bring him up. This is Jim Bridenstine, of NASA administrator, Jim Bridenstine. So the first video is a few outtakes from a speech that he did at Kennedy Space Center to a NASA crowd, and he did that on March 11th. So that was about the same time we were talking about this last week, but we hadn't seen this video yet. It was released a couple of days later. It was a long speech. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I've just got a few outtakes here. So what I'll do is I'll just play this, and we'll have a little bit of reaction to that.
We need to make spaceflight more available to more people. That includes commercial activities. We're talking about manufacturing. We're talking about tourism. We're talking about pharmaceuticals, maybe fiber optics. We need to develop that very robust commercial marketplace in low Earth orbit. It starts with cargo. It is now starting to get to the point where we're going to be launching crew. And by the way, we're going to do that in 2019.
Okay, so far so good. He's just talking about the the commercial stuff. Yeah, we're all happy with that. He did mention that we're going to be launching crew in 2019. That's to low Earth orbit. Okay, so that's not really what we're talking about here. That's what we were talking about last week with the Crew Dragon and stuff getting into low Earth orbit. So we're happy with that. Let's carry on.
It's about having a sustainable human presence on and around the moon. In order to achieve that objective, we need a permanent command and service module in orbit around the moon. We call it Gateway, and that's fully funded in this president's budget request.
Okay, so he's just referring to the Gateway thing there. We won't go too much into that, but that's what you can see on the screen on the left there. Essentially, it's a bit like a mini International Space Station, but it's not a research outpost. This is really just, it's kind of like a waypoint, if you like, on the way to the moon. This is a way to get people to the moon. We won't get bogged down with that now, but that's one of the things that they're looking at.
When the president says go to the moon, and he says go sustainably, in other words, this time when you go, you need to stay. When the president says that, what does it mean? It means we need reusability. We have seen what happens in low Earth orbit when we reuse rockets. The costs go down and the access goes up. We need reusability in the entire architecture between the Earth and the moon. Reusable launch, reusable tugs, reusable command and service modules in orbit around the moon, reusable landers, robots, rovers, all going, human landers going to the surface of the moon. Everything needs to be reusable, built into the architecture. And that's really what Space Policy Directive 1 is all about, a sustainable return to the moon.
So that's interesting. What do we make of that? He's talking a lot about reusability here. Now, certainly we are talking about a sustainable mission back to the moon, but I kind of doubt whether President Trump actually had all this reusable stuff in mind when he was saying that. I think this is a little bit of a stretch here, and it's interesting that he's making such a big point about reusability. Traditionally, that's not really where NASA has been at, and even the SLS, there's nothing about SLS which is reusable. So why is he saying this? Let's carry on.
For the first time in over 10 years, we have money in this budget for a return to the moon with humans. I'm talking about human-rated landers, compatible with Gateway, that can go back and forth to the surface of the moon.
That's nice then. So he's talking about a lander there. So before I said there's no lander currently, so he's saying the lander is budgeted, so we are building a lander to go to the moon. So that's nice. Okay, the speech mentioned lots of other things that we don't really need to talk about today, so we're going to move on to the last bit of Mr. Bridenstine here, and that is March the 16th, just recently now. Jim Bridenstine had to speak to a Senate committee to talk about what was happening with all of this. So let's hear what he said to the Senate committee. Now remember, this is the Senate committee, as in Senate Launch System, the ones who have justified the whole mission with the SLS as being needed. The private companies can't do it. That's what Senate has said. So let's hear what he said to the Senate.
SLS is struggling to meet its schedule. It was originally intended to launch in December of 2019 with, as you mentioned, sir, no later than June of 2020. We are now understanding better how difficult this project is and that it is going to take some additional time. We need to consider as an agency all options to accomplish that objective. Some of those options would include launching the Orion crew capsule and the European service module on a commercial rocket.
Boom! That's it. That is what you call a bombshell, ladies and gentlemen. He has just told the Senate that he doesn't need SLS, in effect. Now, let's just clarify. To be fair to Jim, he actually did go on to say we do need the SLS long term. It's just that right now you want us to get to the moon quickly. We're struggling to get there, so we're thinking maybe we'll just do these next couple of missions with some private companies, right? So SpaceX or someone else, he didn't mention them by name, but maybe one of them could get us just through these next few missions just until SLS catches up, and then we'll be back in business with SLS. However, he has admitted, a NASA administrator has admitted that they don't need SLS to get people from low Earth orbit to the moon. Or at least he said it's a possibility. He didn't definitely say they could do it, but he said that it may include that possibility. So that's a really, really big deal. So where does that leave us now? He said we could try it with one of the commercial rockets. So what we've got here is a lineup of the different rockets that may in the future be able to get us back to the moon. First of all, you've got NASA's SLS over here. That's what Senate wants. That's what we've all assumed was going to happen. Currently, in the private world, in the commercial world, we have two possibilities: SpaceX's Falcon Heavy and ULA's Delta IV Heavy. Either of those are contenders. It's a little bit more complicated, and because we've been going on about this a long time, I kind of want to start wrapping this up. Let's just say that neither of those are ready to go now to take people to the moon. Neither of them are human rated, and there's quite a few problems with using either of those vehicles. For one, I mean, you can see just from the graphic here that they're a lot smaller, but they have much less capability than even this SLS. It would probably take 2 launches of either of these vehicles, or even perhaps one of each, to do the same thing that one SLS launch could do. However, the cost of SLS is such that it could well be, and probably would be, cheaper to launch 2 others than one SLS. Okay, so even though Jim Bridenstine is saying we can just get through the next few missions with perhaps some of these commercial ones, then get back to SLS, really, if you can do the next few missions with the Falcon Heavy or Delta IV Heavy, why can't you keep using them? There's really nothing to say you can't keep going. Not only that, but really, all of this is only really for the next 10, maybe 15 years max. And then, within that time, we hopefully will have these other private vehicles coming online. Blue Origin's New Glenn and SpaceX's BFR. And those will have all sorts of capability and really will make SLS obsolete. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with no idea which rockets are taking us back to the moon. Jim Bridenstine has said we're going back to the moon. He's made a big thing of saying we're going quickly. He's not mucking around. That's quite a big thing here, I think. He's saying, look, we're supposed to be going by next year at the latest, and I'm going to make that happen. One way or another, NASA is going back to the moon. So that's big news. He's given the big middle finger to the Senate. Who knows how that will play out? That's big news. As far as we go further into the future, it's going to be really, really difficult to tell, but it's starting to look like a real genuine possibility that that whole SLS system that we've been working on all of this time and dates back right through Constellation, 15 years or so worth of work. The total cost just of the SLS system has been estimated at $14 billion. That could all go up in smoke. If he decides that we don't need this anymore, that's 14 billion wasted dollars. That's a big number. and I think it's scandalous, to be honest. But anyway, we don't know that that's what's going to happen. We just have to wait and see. Now, according to Jim Bridenstine, we will have a decision in a couple of weeks, so we will certainly be getting back to that. So I think probably actually we really kind of need to leave it there actually and keep moving on. But that's the big news. We don't know what's happening with going back to the moon. We don't know how we're getting there, but we do know that we are going there, or at least NASA is very, very motivated to get there. So with all of that, if we go back to our competition question, actually, hang on, I've got to find it again. What was our competition question? It was about the SLS, and it was, should NASA keep SLS going or cancel it and just use private launch vehicles? It is a complex issue. There's been a lot of money spent on it so far, and it's almost ready to go. Do you want to dump something at this stage when it's this close to going? On the other hand, do we want to keep throwing good money after bad? The SLS launches are much more expensive than the private ones. Maybe we're better to cut our losses and just cop that $14 billion loss. I don't know. Tell us what you think. Jess, has anyone answered that question yet? Has anyone had a stab at it? No? Okay, go for your life, because what we're going to do is everyone who answers that question, just give us your opinion. It doesn't matter what it is. You don't even need to give good answers, although it would be nice. But everyone is going in to win this plasma reactor. It's not quite the same as an SLS, but I think it'll be lots of fun. So there you go. We can post that anywhere. So get your answers in and be in to win that prize. And at the moment, to be honest, your chances are actually looking pretty good. Righto, let's just wrap up the whole news section, I think. Let's just finish this up. What I thought would be a good idea, actually, before I finish up the news, is to make a note of any fake news that I've seen in the world of space, because this happens a lot with science reporting. I don't really like the term fake news, but it's just a bit topical at the moment, so I used it. So I've just got a couple of things here that came across my desk this week. First one, let's have a look at this. Goodness me. Scientists reverse time with quantum computer in breakthrough study. That sounds impressive, doesn't it? That's from The Independent. Now, this has been reported all over the place. I saw this on CNN and lots of mainstream news all over the place. Even that highly respected scientific journal Cosmopolitan got in on the act and talked about how scientists turned back time, and it's like Back to the Future is coming true. Except that is not at all what happened, of course. Now, I really only skimmed this, and because I've been tied up with the other news, I didn't really get a good chance to look at it. But from what I can understand, this report was actually some scientists who had simulated reverse entropy. So if you happen to be into thermodynamics, you'll get what that's about. Entropy is very closely related to time. And yeah, if you reverse entropy, you could argue about reversing time, whatever. But look, the long and the short of it is no one has reversed time. No one has invented a time machine. And it really is utter nonsense. Here's another one that just came through to me just yesterday. Someone emailed this through. This is from dailygalaxy.com. The headline goes, warp bubbles, NASA manipulating space-time to achieve faster than light travel. Wow, that's another cool achievement just over the weekend. Nice work, NASA. Okay, hang on a sec, what have we got here? Sorry, I've just lost the notification. Okay, cool, we've got an answer here. Bin the rocket, go private, 14 billion cheaper than the amount spent on wars anyway. That's a good point. Yeah, nice point. We wasted an awful lot more than that on wars, don't we? So maybe we should just cop that 14 billion. Thanks for that, Floyd. So we've got one person entered the competition. So far, you're in the lead. Well done. We haven't had anyone else yet, have we? Oh, we have. We've had a couple. Hang on. I'll tell you what. We'll just finish this off, then we'll go over to Jess. So anyway, whenever you see a news article that claims that someone has invented a time machine or faster than light travel, they seem to be the two popular things, you can pretty safely ignore those things, it's kind of a shame actually, because usually you find that there is something interesting behind it all, but it's just been distorted and they jump on it, they exaggerate it. If we just skim through this here and find out what's actually happening, if we go down the second paragraph there, it says, what is it? They say they have found a way to configure the hypothetical negative energy matter. I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. Negative energy. Well, look, negative energy is a part of this whole warp travel thing. If you're familiar with the Alcubierre drive, the idea is that theoretically speaking, we might be able to develop a warp drive to go faster than the speed of light, but it would depend on hypothetical negative energy or negative mass. So I suggest to the journalists and headline editor of dailygalaxy.com, go and look up the word hypothetical. It will give you some good insight into exactly where we are at with faster than light travel. Anyway, that's enough of the fake news. Let us just go back over here, and Jess, we'll just get your mic ready, and you've got a couple of, that's the wrong one altogether. Jess, you've got a couple of answers over there, have you?
Yep, we've got 3. So we've got from Tessa Yardley, I think the SLS should be used too much human effort and money wasted otherwise. Can you explain why there's a huge rush to get to the moon? Yes, there. Is it to beat the Russians?
Okay, is that all we've got from you, Jess?
No, there's 2 more.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, let's just handle that one first then. So, good point you made. Now, the human effort and everything that's gone into it. Now, I've met a bunch of NASA people, including some who are working on SLS, and I cannot imagine what it would be like for those people for the rug to be pulled out from under them now. It would be absolutely devastating. And, you know, the morale it's worth a lot. So I think that's a good point you made there. Now the race back to the moon, we're not attempting to beat the Russians. The Russians are in all sorts of trouble with their space program. It's still ticking over, but they are not really contenders. Funnily enough, out of all the people going back to the moon, Russia is kind of the one big space power that's really just not part of this at the moment. So to be honest. It is just kind of a general race to be first back there, I think. So we've got private companies wanting to make a commercial go of it. We've got America, who was rather indifferent about going back to the moon until China started putting stuff on the moon. And of course, China's doing really well on the moon. They've got a rover on the far side of the moon at the moment, and they've got serious plans to get back to the moon. So I think it's just a general race. Everyone's aware that other people are going back there. There are commercial opportunities there, and people and countries just don't want to be left behind. Yeah, it is all on. Righto, Jess, have we got anything else there then? Okay, what do we got?
From driver Lance.
Yep.
I don't know if they should keep going with the SLS. I can see both sides of the argument. Maybe should be a politician and stay out of the stay on the fence.
Fair enough. We'll still take that as a good entry into the competition. Thank you, Lance, for your comments, and thank you last week as well, by the way. What else have we got, Jess?
Another one is use what they can from the first system and transfer over to the new program. At least save some dollars. Okay,
right. So that's good thinking. And in fact, to be fair, I guess you could argue that that's what happened with SLS. That they were using existing components from the space shuttle, and that does make sense. It makes sense economically, and it also makes sense from a technical point of view. You've got something that you know works. It's got a history behind it. So yep, that makes a lot of sense as well. So look, thank you so much for all of those entries. It's nice to have a bit of action going on there. Right, I think we need to be moving on. Where were we up to? We've done the news. Look, I'm just looking at our time here. I tell you what, now is where we are supposed to be having a look at what's in the night sky, but we've got another thing from Floyd. Thank you very much. And of course, I don't actually get your names. Here's a good point. When you text in, could you just put your name at the end of it? I didn't think to mention that before. Thanks. Yes, I think we should keep using SLS to keep the Americans happy about going to space and keep funding NASA. Okay, another good point. They've all been good points. Thank you, guys. So, I mean, there's a lot of that morale and support for NASA and stuff that I think is important to try and keep going. So thank you very much for that. Righto, let's keep moving along because time's moving along here, and we do want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the night sky. So let's go over here. We are looking at our Stellarium program, which shows us what is in the night sky. Now, pretty much the same deal as last week. We will just move forward in time a little bit until it gets a little bit darker. Now, you remember last week I said when you are looking out at the night sky and planning what you're going to be looking at, you really want to be seeing what the moon is doing. So if we look around here, we can find the moon. Now, if we zoom in on it, you can actually see where we are with the moon at the moment. And you will see that it is basically a full moon. It's tomorrow night is actually the full moon, and as far as looking at things in the night sky, that pretty much kills everything. The moon is just too bright. You can still go out there. In some ways, it's kind of good because you see just the brightest stars, so it's a bit of a different way of looking at it, and it can help you get to know some of the brighter stars. So you might want to be going out and having a look at the Southern Cross, which is over here, these stars this from the Southern Cross. But to be honest, when it's a full moon, it's really not a great time to be out there. You can still go out there in the morning. Remember last week we talked about that lineup of Jupiter, Saturn and Venus in the eastern sky in the morning. So if you're up and about from about 4-ish, 4 through to 5:30 or something in the morning tomorrow morning, or in the coming days, you'll still be able to see those. So we won't talk about much else there, except let's ask another question. Today, actually technically tomorrow, isn't it? But around about now, in our journey through space, it's a notable day for the Earth as we travel through space. Why? What's special about today? Does anyone in our live audience? Oh, actually, I've spoken to someone before, so you can't give it away. Okay, someone at home, call in, tell us, or text, whatever, put on the live chat, what is special or notable today about Earth's journey through space? Now, in future, with our What's in the Night Sky, I actually want to spend more time on this. I don't want to go on and on and on about the news. I want to talk about some of this other stuff as well, but just because of the way things have turned out tonight, I think we'll probably leave that, but there is... So I tell you what, I'll see if anyone answers that, but don't let me forget. We need to come back to... Oh, we've got someone. Hang on, Jess. Let me just come over to you there. What have you got there, Jess?
From Driver Lance, he said equinox.
Thank you, Driver Lance. You're exactly right. It is an equinox today. So what is an equinox? Well, we have 2 equinoxes a year and 2 solstices a year. Most of you probably kind of get the general drift. Let's see. I've got an Earth over here. This is my kind of setup for showing you the Earth at the moment. I've got a globe where the bracket off it broke, so now I just stick a screwdriver up its date and kind of go like this, and we've got a spinning Earth. So the Earth is going around the Sun like this. It orbits around and around the Sun. You can imagine the Sun in the middle. The Earth goes around and around it like this, but the Earth is actually a little bit tilted like that as it goes around the Sun. But it's important to note that as the Earth goes around the Sun, that tilt points in the same direction. So if you can imagine a sun just right in the middle here, as the Earth goes around it, the axis of the Earth, the tilt is kind of pointing in the same direction as it goes around. So when it's over one side of the Sun, over here, imagine the Sun in here, the Earth's over here, and it's kind of tilted towards the Sun. So the part on the top, the North Pole, is facing towards the Sun, makes it summer up there and winter down there. As it goes around the other side of the Sun, the tilt is still pointing in the same direction, but now it's reversed. The North Pole is pointing away from the Sun, the South Pole is pointing more towards the Sun, so it's summer down here and winter up there. Halfway in between, it's basically even. Okay, half of the Earth is being lit up, half of it is night. It basically just goes, the terminator or the line between day and night goes right through the North Pole to the South Pole, and we have roughly equal day and night. And that's where we get the term equinox from. It comes from the Latin words which originally meant equal day and night. So nox meaning night, and so equal night. So there we go, that is our equinox. Now, this one, I have to think about this one actually. This is the vernal equinox actually. So that's where it gets a little bit confusing. So there are 2 equinoxes. One traditionally marks the start of spring, one the start of autumn, depending on which hemisphere you are in. But because these things keep getting named in the northern hemisphere, it's called the vernal equinox or the spring equinox, and it's spring in the northern hemisphere. So we actually, we start autumn with the vernal equinox. I've got that the right way around, haven't I? So it's a little bit confusing. But you will actually find some publications and some people refer to the spring or autumn or vernal or autumnal equinoxes, and they get them around the wrong way, or it's not really that clear cut. So there's a little bit of confusion there. So just be careful when you're referring to or reading about the equinoxes, that you're aware that there is actually a little bit of confusion over which equinox is which. And it's also worth noting that the equinoxes and solstices in astronomy they do mark the start of that season, unlike in meteorology and in some other circles where it's a little bit different. Anyway, that is the equinox. Righto, we've been going for 50 minutes. This is where we are due to have a rant. Do we still want to do that? Oh, we're getting nods from over here. It's getting really hot in here, isn't it? Sorry, I turned the fans off because they make a lot of noise, so apologies for the heat in here. Do you guys really want to hear a rant this week? Okay, we'll give it a go. Let me get a glass of water for this. This is where Dave has a rant. The one that I was thinking about doing for tonight, and because I haven't prepared anything else at all, I'm going to have to go with. Wasn't entirely sure about doing this one for reasons that might become clear shortly. But anyway, I decided we will have a go at this old chestnut, a favourite topic of mine, Mars One. So if you have heard me talking about Mars One before, you will know that I've really never been kind to these people, and I'm certainly not going to be kind to them tonight. Let's go back in history a little bit. Let me just get myself organised here. I need to show you a video. Now, so Mars One was a project that was set up in 2011. It was officially launched in 2012. And if you recall, it was that mission that suggested or proposed sending people to Mars but not coming back to spend the rest of their life on Mars. So what I'll do is I will play you, look, I'm going to spare you the entire promotional video that they made, and I'm just going to show you a shortened version where I've just got the important bits.
Mars One will establish human settlement on Mars in 2023. In that year, the first group of 4 humans will land on Mars. Every 2 years after that, another group will join the settlement. Mars One has designed a mission that is much simpler than previous designs for Mars missions. The most significant simplification is that the crew is actually going to stay and live on Mars with the intention to remain there for the rest of their lives.
We will finance this mission by creating the biggest media event ever around it. Everybody in the world can see everything that will happen in the preparations and on Mars.
Mars One paid visits to major aerospace companies around the world. In these meetings, they confirmed to us that they can supply the required equipment. For every component, we have at least one potential supplier. All these suppliers have written letters of interest for Mars One.
This is the plan. In 2016, a communication satellite and a supply mission will be sent to Mars. In 2018, a large planetary rover will be sent to Mars. It will drive around on Mars to find the best location for the settlement.
In 2020, living units, life support units, a rover, and more supplies will be sent to Mars. The rovers will prepare the settlement for human arrival. They will extract the inflatable section from the living unit. The life support unit will prepare the outpost for arrival of the humans. The crew will depart in September 2022, when the settlement is fully operational and habitable. They will be flying to Mars in a transit habitat with a lander attached to it.
7 months later, in April 2023, the humans will land on Mars, the next giant leap for mankind.
Thank you so much, everyone. Actually, I meant to do that at the start of the show. I meant to say if we have any audio problems or things like that. It's actually really hard to monitor it with these things. So thank you so much for that. Anyway, we're back in business. Right, so what were we saying? It's really easy to look back now and say, look, this was never going to work and you were all idiots for ever thinking it would. So, but what was it actually like at the time? What was the reaction when that promotional video came out? Well, amongst the general public and the media, they absolutely loved it to pieces. They lapped it up. It was all over the news. And in fact, it was so popular that it became the mission to Mars. As far as the public was concerned, whenever they talked about going to Mars, whenever I was asked questions, they just assumed that this was the mission to go to Mars, and that's what we are working towards. Of course, there are lots of different organizations trying to get to Mars. These guys were only one of them, but they were so successful in their publicity that it just really took over. So the public, the media, they were really excited about this whole thing. Amongst the space community, so people who work in aerospace, astronomers, and anyone who's got a real interest in this, they were much more skeptical about the whole thing. Right from the outset, really. So I was one of them. I really didn't think this had much chance at all. But like a lot of people in the industry, my feeling was, well, you know, it's pretty harmless. It's got people talking about it. Good on you for trying. That idea of sending people to Mars and not bringing them back, it's kind of weird. But okay, maybe it's got some merit. Let's talk about it. Let's have a discussion and just see how practical that whole idea was. But it turns out that it just wasn't. Now, every year I actually do a talk to the local seniors at the local college here who do a module on colonizing Mars. And in that I go through and have a look at all the different ways that we are trying to get to Mars, and I rate each one out of 5 stars. So I think NASA's, I've been giving them about 3 to 3.5 stars, and various other ones I give anywhere sort of from 2 to 4 stars. SpaceX gets 4 stars. But with the Mars one, I've always been very skeptical of it, and I actually went through this whole thing where I talked about all this very serious problems and how it could just never possibly happen. And at their height, when I was most excited about Mars one, I gave them half a star for trying. And in later years, I actually dropped that. So at first it was kind of like, yeah, good on you guys, good on you for giving this a blast, and some good did come out of it. It created a conversation, and we started looking at, is this a good idea? Could it work? But it turned out that it just couldn't, as we kind of thought, but it did create some good discussion. I think for me, the turning point was in, I think it was 2014, yes, it was 2014, when a team at MIT actually did a serious analysis of the whole mission. So this is a bunch of engineers, people who actually know what they're talking about, and they concluded that it was completely infeasible. There are just too many extremely difficult or insurmountable problems, that there was just so much that they just couldn't do, that it just wasn't going to happen. So this was the first like real serious rebuttal or even analysis of the whole thing. Mars One, their reaction to this whole thing was basically to bend over and stick their head where no one could see it and just pretend that nothing had happened and just carry on. And that's when people like me started getting a bit annoyed about the whole thing, because these guys are getting money. They're asking for donations, subscriptions, they got a lot of investment. Now, no one really knows exactly how much they got, but I've heard figures of tens of millions of dollars have been sunk into this project. And as each year went past, I started getting more and more annoyed with these guys for just carrying on and getting nowhere and doing nothing and just talking endlessly and sucking up money, sucking up the limelight. And it was just really starting to get on my nerves. And then eventually, of course, this year, it finally all came to a head. And if you read my newspaper column, I've actually got it here. I do a monthly newspaper column. It's supposed to be about what's in the night sky, but I was talking about Mars last month, and I just couldn't help myself. I had to give one last dig to the Mars One people, and I said, what did I say here? Mars One was never going to fly. Their rocket building plan had less substance than aerogel. Their fundraising plan was astonishingly naive. Their astronaut recruitment process was terrifyingly inept. Their whole strategy was masterminded by well-meaning but slow-witted muppets. And I went on to say, as desperation set in, they went from being comically incompetent to seriously fraudulent. It's been obvious for years that the whole fatuous endeavour was doomed. The only question was how long it would take the company to go broke. And last month we finally answered that question, because they have indeed gone belly up, and theoretically that's the last we will hear from them. However, that's not the impression you would get from their website. Look at this. This is a screenshot from yesterday. This is the Mars One website, and there's nothing on this to indicate that anything's wrong. As far as they're concerned, they're still full steam ahead, even though they've gone bankrupt. Now, technically speaking, I will give it to them. It's the commercial arm that has gone bankrupt. Mars One is two different entities. There's a non-profit arm and a commercial arm. But let's be honest, the non-profit arm is nothing without their money. The commercial arm has gone bankrupt, owing money, and when you go to the site, it looks like it's all still a go. Now, okay, not so bad in itself, a bit dumb for not fronting up, but this is what gets me. That button there, support now. If you click on that button, you go through to this page, and they're still taking money from you on the promise that this project is still working, and that gets up my nose. These people are looking for investors, they're taking your money, and there's no chance. It's over. It's game over for these guys, but they're still taking money from innocent people who think that it's still a goer, and that annoys me. That's worth ranting about, because in the whole time that Mars One has been going, I have avoided using the word scam, because I don't. It's really hard to dislike Baz and his team, right? They seem like nice, genuine people. They're trying to do a good thing, and you don't want to be too hard on them. They just deluded themselves. That's really what's happening. But now, enough's enough. This isn't funny anymore. You're taking people's money fraudulently. That's what's happening. Mars One is now a scam. Okay, so I think one of the things that really bugs me about this whole thing is you've got all of these other organizations. These are just some others. I just grabbed a few quick examples here. These are some of the main ones. These are other people or organizations who are trying to get to Mars. The Inspiration Mars one, that is an outfit that was started by Dennis Tito, a very wealthy American. And he wanted to do a flyby mission around Mars. He had $100 million, and he was willing to put that up. To be honest, it wasn't a great plan. I was never a fan of it, but it was another plan. He had money, he had some resources. He was trying to do that thing. You've got SpaceX doing their thing. They've got the practical capabilities to make things happen, but they're worried about running their everyday business. You've got places like the Mars Society and the Planetary Society and others doing lots of really good work, but struggling to get in the limelight and struggling to get attention from the media and that sort of thing. So you've got all of these people trying to do this. Meanwhile, you've got those gormless numpties over at Mars One who are sucking all of that limelight, getting all the attention, pulling in all the money, and sucking it down a hole. It's going nowhere. And these ones are missing out. Maybe, just maybe, you could have thought about working together. Yeah, you've got blimmin' daydreaming Dennis over here who had a lame plan and it wasn't going to work, but he's got money and he's got motivation. Maybe you could have worked together. Maybe when you saw things were turning pear-shaped, you could have done something about it, you could have got together and actually made something that worked. But instead, in your hubris and your arrogance and your blinkered view, your fingers in your ears, you didn't want to hear the real story and you just carried on regardless, and now you're stuffed. It's dumb. You didn't need to be like that. It could have been better. It didn't need to go up in flames like this. Dummies! You're all dummies. I did get worked up about it, eh? I didn't think I was going to, but I got there in the end. Anyway, look, our time is up really, so I think that's probably enough of a rant from me. Let's go back to where we were. So look, we're going to have to miss out on the other stuff tonight. We're not going to talk about any resources. We're going to have to miss it. Everything is fake tonight. Look, just for those of you who don't know what that's all about, we have a segment where we talk about conspiracy theories and, the fake moon landings, the flat earth and all that sort of stuff. I'm really looking forward to doing some of this stuff. It's actually a lot of fun. And I should actually clarify, I watched a little bit of the show last week. I hate watching myself back, but I forced myself to watch a little bit of it, and I kind of felt I was actually a little bit harsh and dismissive of some people. I'm actually quite friendly to people who think that the moon landings didn't real, or flat earthers and things like that. You'll find that there's a lot of real conflict between traditional scientists and especially the flat earthers, of course. I don't like that. I don't like yelling and swearing and insulting and all of that kind of stuff. I actually much prefer calm discussion about all that. I feel I'm calming myself down now. I'm quite happy to talk about things like flat earther, and if the flat earthers, if you want to come in and join in the conversation, I'm more than happy to do that, and I promise I will try my best not to rant at you. Right, where are we up to? We need to talk about wrapping up the competition, don't we? So what we were going to do is we were going to have a draw. Do you think we're ready to do that, Jess? What's that, sorry? We are? Okay, so what we're going to do is, let's just go to our wide camera here. Do you want to come and get one of these people to draw it, Jess? So we've got, now how did you go with the text ones? Have you got them included in it? Okay, so we've got everyone in the space helmet there. And we are going to draw a name out of the hat. Would you like to do the honours and draw a name out of the hat? Hat, it's a helmet. It's a helmet. Now, unfortunately, our mobile microphone's not working. You may remember last week we had some trouble with that. I found out what's wrong with that. So we're just going to have to call it out. So what have we got here, Jess? Driver Lance. Good on you, buddy. See, all your efforts have come to fruition. There you go. You are going to be the proud owner of this plasma reactor. I hope you have a lot of fun with that, Driver Lance. What we need you to do is if we could just get you to contact us with a postal address, and we will get that out to you as soon as possible. You can either text it to us on the number there, or email it through, or drop us a Facebook message or whatever. That would be fine. Sorry guys for leaving your camera up there. Now I think really, yes, we are over time, so that probably let's ask if anyone else has got any other comments or things that they want to talk about before we wrap up. Has anyone got anything else? No, I think everyone's just sweltering in here, to be honest. We're learning as we go here. There's lots of things that we need to sort out. One of them is the temperature in here. To be fair, it has been a very muggy day. Anyway, look, thank you so much for participating tonight. We've still got a small audience here, I see, but we are slowly building it up, and we will get there in the end. What we need you to do is go out there and tell other people about the show, and try and get a few other people to come and join in. So anyway, without further ado, I think we will actually just call it quits there. Thank you again, everyone, and we will see you again next week.